Dear Christopher Soccer, thank you so much for submitting your film Counterintelligence for consideration for South by Southwest 2017. Your commitment, passion, and talent are fuel for everything we do. We've carefully considered your film for our 2017 program. Regrettably, Counterintelligence is no longer in the running for the final South by Southwest 2017 Film Festival program. Fuck.
A free film. For no money, for no anything. Half of the battle to make a good film in the United States. A free film, when I say good film, it's a free film. Whether it's good or bad, we don't know. But we'll put a year in for no money, for no anything. Simply because there's an expression that has to be said. Now, we don't have any reverence for this expression. We don't believe it's a church. We have to have a good time, otherwise we die. I mean, how much does this cost? You know, paper to do the hard work, and how much does reels cost? We get it all from the major studios. They help us destroy them. That's the way we work. Because if we make a good film, they will only suffer. And as they suffer, they come and they say, please make films for us, and we say, no, we don't want to make films for you. Hip hip hooray.
You think that, like, oh my God, I have to put this in right now.
That's co-producer, art director Dre Tolbert again, and she's talking about something I know isn't specific to me or Counterintelligence, the mad dash to lock picture and ship to the place where films go to explode into the collective consciousness, the festival.
It'll be ready when it's ready, and it's still relevant. It's still a good movie. I did a really good job. I worked with dope people, and it'll come out when it comes out.
Thinking that way is easier said than done. At the time, it was near mania.
You were stressing yourself out for the first 3 months after our shoot because you thought you had to get everything in right now, and I had to cut.
If your movie emerges at Sundance or South by, you can imagine yourself hobnobbing with your heroes, fielding offer after offer, shaking hands, and laying brick after brick in the yellow brick road to your dreams, like so many others before you. This is a misnomer, because, in truth, there really haven't been that many before you.
Everybody's different. Your goals are different than my goals, and all of your filmmaker friends, have different aspirations in terms of what they're trying to do with the film.
That's film producer and distribution executive Jason Brubaker. If you're a filmmaker who spends a lot of time online reading about distribution, you probably know Jason as the creator of Filmmaking Stuff, a site and podcast dedicated to exploring the wild, newish landscape of film distribution. He does this through filmmakingstuff.com, which I highly recommend you check out. It's a great resource.
Some people want exposure. That's all they want. They just want to get it out there. Hey, my film's in the platform. Check it out. I made a movie. I'm a filmmaker. That's great. Awesome. If that's you, more power to you.
The distinction Jason's making between filmmakers' goals is worth considering when you're dealing with where your finished film should go. It's not uncommon to hear filmmakers say their main goal is to get wider exposure for their film and personal brand, essentially. But there's another approach, one that's arisen rapidly over the past few years.
Other people want to maximize their revenue. These are entrepreneurial filmmakers that see the film as a product. How do you go out there? How do you make more sales? How do you maximize exposure? How do you get word of mouth going?
The entrepreneurial filmmaker. To some extent, this concept isn't new. Charlie Chaplin, Jerry Lewis, Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas. But like everything else in the internet age, business-conscious creativity has become far more accessible. The notion of filmmakers taking ownership of their work in the marketplace has paired with available tools. But the mentality is still just beginning to take hold.
Most filmmakers never, ever, ever take time to learn how the business of filmmaking actually works. And as a result, they never take time to learn how to actually make money in filmmaking by leveraging the type of promotion that you can control.
This is beginning to change to a great extent. Long before Counterintelligence, right after I shot my previous film, the documentary Light, my Showhawk co-founder bought me a book that absolutely changed my life and filmmaking forever. John Reese's Think Outside the Box Office was a watershed moment for independent filmmakers, and I revisit it constantly. My copy's dog-eared, marked up, bookmarked, and basically falling apart. It was many indie producers and directors' first calcified realization. The old model is dead. We can take control of our own distribution. The old model for indies was pretty simple. Fund your film, produce it, complete it, ship it off to a few festivals. From the festivals, you'd hopefully be offered some sort of distribution deal, or a few if you were lucky, and you could weigh which one was best. The money the distributor paid your production, hopefully reimbursed your financiers, maybe profited a bit, and if you were really lucky, your contract with the distributor would entitle the production partners to a bit of revenue. Throughout the early 2000s, the model started imploding. More festivals started sprouting up as they became lucrative business opportunities, if handled right. Professional-grade cameras and editing software became cheaper and more available. Every year, more and more movies were getting made. Festival submissions started rocketing through the roof. By 2010, when Mike Hall and I made our first feature, Painted City, and submitted it to Slamdance, Sundance, and other fests, we got rejected across the board. Now, the movie was flawed as hell, but more importantly, we got replies like the one you heard at the beginning of this episode. Here's the next part of that letter we got from South by for Counterintelligence. Quote, "We wish we could communicate with you personally, but the quantity is just too vast. There's always far more work of interest than we can accommodate with our limited screening slots." End quote. In 2017, Sundance had 13,782 submissions, 2,367 of which were dramatic features, 1,701 were feature documentaries. Of these roughly 4,000 features, only 120 were accepted. Slamdance 2017 saw 6,009 submissions with 100 accepted. And in that year, 97 of Sundance's 120 features received distribution deals, while only roughly 13 of Slamdance's 2016 lineup of 99 films got distribution. The point should be clear. There's a massive wall of competition out there, and it's only getting larger each year.
You can no longer simply make a movie and hope for the best, right? You have to make a film with a subject matter and an execution that's remarkable enough so that other people are going to start talking about you so that you can rise above the noise.
That's great and all, but how, you might wonder? Well, that's the rough prospect. It's hard to tell, and really when you're submitting to the same pools, Sundance, South by, Tribeca, that small studios are using to launch their star-studded smaller films, what are your odds of rising above anything with a little micro-budget flick? Given all the obstacles, some new options have arisen in the past few years. And we circle back to the filmmaking entrepreneur.
There are various aggregators out there that you can actually pay, up front to cover all your lab expenses and your delivery fees. You take on those expenses yourself. You become the distributor. You can reach some of these marketplaces.
The aggregators Jason is referring to are companies that a filmmaker can pay to handle getting their film up onto iTunes, Amazon, Hulu, Netflix, and other prominent video-on-demand platforms. Some aggregators, like Distribber, where Jason actually works, take an upfront fee. Others take a percentage of the revenue your film makes on the platforms, usually around 20%. For most traditional distributors, this service is a key feature of what they can offer filmmakers. If you can take the aggregator route, what most distributors can additionally offer can then often be limited. This is causing many filmmakers, particularly those working on micro-budgets like ours, to adopt the aggregator approach, plan their own release strategy, and enact what's long been called self-distribution, as in marketing and selling their film without the help of a distributor. Now, I hate the term self-distribution personally. It sounds a bit demeaning, like the digital age equivalent of going straight to video. Another term's popping up recently that's not perfect, but I prefer it. Direct distribution. And that's what we'll call the approach that foregoes traditional distributors from here on out. So, given these two available options, and before we dive into what we're doing with Counterintelligence, how does one choose between working with a distributor or direct distribution? Jason seems to think it comes back to those priorities he was talking about earlier, with a few added considerations to make.
Does the distributor provide value over what you could do on your own, if you went out and hired an aggregator, for example, to get into all the same digital platforms, right? So if you became your own distributor and you paid your own lab fees to get into all the various platforms, would you be in a better position than what a distributor could offer you, or would a distributor offer you something better than you could do on your own?
If you're weighing traditional versus direct distribution, think of the benefits afforded to you and your film. Taking delivery to platforms like iTunes and Amazon out of the equation, is there a financial incentive to going with a distributor?
Little insider secret about film distribution, but sometimes you'll get paid a minimum guarantee, and then through the art of creative accounting, you won't see any other money on the deal, maybe ever, for the length of the deal.
Distributor pays to acquire a film's rights for a few years. Distributor includes in contract with producers that producers will get a percentage of profits after distributor recoups their investment and distribution costs. Distributor keeps accumulating distribution costs. Producers never see a dime. Think Outside the Box Office was my first exposure to this trickery, and since reading it, I've heard these horror stories over and over, going all the way back to Miramax in the 90s. And it's only gotten worse because distribution companies, on average, are spending far less to acquire films than ever before. Sure, Netflix and Amazon will swoop in and make a few deals into the millions, but those are outliers. The vast majority of smaller distributors are swooping in and offering in the tens of thousands for films, sometimes into the hundreds of thousands, but mostly in the tens of thousands. So you make it into a bigger marketplace festival like Sundance with your micro-budget film produced for under $250,000. Let's be honest. Even though you've beaten the odds and gotten in with a movie that small, the odds of getting a distribution deal from Netflix or Amazon are super slim, like a 14% chance, max. You get approached by one or two smaller distributors offering a minimum guarantee of between 50 to 100 grand to acquire and release your film. They tell you your film's going on all the major platforms. We'll take it from here. If your budget was 50 grand and you get 75 grand from the distributor, again, big if, you might think you're in a good place. You're already profiting, and the movie isn't even out yet. But
does the deal include real marketing? Oftentimes, film distributors will throw in marketing into the agreement, and you all of a sudden think, oh, marketing, that's awesome. I love marketing. But do you know how your film's going to be marketed?
Once it's up on the platforms, how does your film find its audience? Not through fucking osmosis, I can assure you.
A distributor might go off to a film market with your film and 20 other films in their catalog. They'll get a hotel room, they'll set up a booth, and then that's part of their marketing, charging the hotel and those types of business expenses against your film.
So they take your film to a market like AFM, the American Film Market, or Cannes, and try to sell the rights to overseas buyers. You could have done that with a little education, training, and a good pitch, or you could have hired a consultant to help without signing away your movie for a half a decade. And you would have pocketed those profits on sales. Instead, your distributor pockets them, adds the trip, hotel room, and any other costs to your movie's account, and you never see a dime because they're still spending money to get your film out. Not to mention, they're often selling in bulk, their entire catalog of properties, so there's no assurance yours got its maximum value. This doesn't represent all distributors, but it does represent a lot of them.
Another type of marketing is where the distributor says, you know what, we're going to put $100,000 in billboard ads or Facebook ads or Google AdWords, any of these types of things out there. Well, suddenly that's a little bit different and it's a little bit more quantifiable. Oh my gosh, you're going to devote $100,000 solely to marketing my film, and this is specifically how you're going to market? Well, that starts to be a little bit interesting.
When you're looking for things you and your team couldn't do yourself, this is quite often a good example. A larger targeted marketing budget and the people to execute it. Unless you budget it accordingly, this could meet a need. Still, how do you know they'll deliver on this marketing promise or how targeted they'll actually be?
What you want to avoid mostly with all these deals is creative accounting. You don't want to just get lost in the minutia of where, you get some sort of report each quarter and it'll say like, oh, your film made $100,000, but our expenses were $101,000. So therefore, no pay today.
If your movie brings in $100,000 in sales revenue, but the distributor amasses $101,000 in expenses to get the movie out there, looks like they're still down $1 on paper, and you might not have any way to tell where exactly that $101,000 was spent, if at all. See how this shakes out? It can get nasty. As long as they can keep showing costs and cancel out profits on paper, you're never seeing a dime. They could be charging expenses for 3 different films to your account and showing you that without you ever being able to tell or prove those charges aren't helping your film. So think about your little micro-budget picture. If your budget is small enough, you don't have to make that many sales to recoup your money and start profiting, right? And you don't have to recoup the cost a distributor spent to acquire your film. Once you begin bringing in money, the only expenses counting against your profits are those you're in control of because you and or your team are managing the marketing costs and strategies, and hopefully you budgeted for them from the outset. So we're back to direct distribution. By employing an aggregator like Distribber to get your film onto VOD platforms like iTunes, Amazon, and Hulu, and others, you're already in the marketplace. Now, you just have to find your film's audience. So where do you start? Some people start before they even make their film.
Focus on your niche, not the masses. When it comes to making money in filmmaking, most filmmakers focus on making a blockbuster film on a backyard indie budget. So instead, I want you to focus on the resources you have.
Some filmmakers start by identifying a niche, a consolidated community of people connected by a common interest or passion. Then filmmakers create a film aimed at that niche. They research that niche and often reverse engineer the film from the ground up to appeal to this group. This is often easiest with documentaries that focus on a specific topic. Niches could include competitive cyclists, chefs, firefighters, or concert pianists. Think of the most specific group of people and find where they congregate online or in person. Hollywood studios tend to make films appealing to the widest possible audience, but they also have the money to market to that wide audience. Indie filmmakers don't have those resources, so making something generalized may not be the best move. From the outset, I knew counterintelligence was pretty niche. It's definitely not for everyone, but defining a specific niche is difficult. It's a dark comedy, but how would I get the film in front of everyone who likes dark comedies? It's a little political, it's satirical, it's a spy thriller. It has strong female characters. These are all facets of the movie, but how could I cull them together into a narrow and specific niche? First, I looked at other films, big and small, that hit these points and how they performed on different VOD platforms. But this can be misleading.
If there's 10 other films out there that are similar to yours and each one of them went out into a marketplace like iTunes and they did some degree of success, like that doesn't have a whole lot to do with your film because we're talking about a direct-to-consumer marketplace. So instead of using comps, instead of looking at other films that were successful and trying to compare them to your film, because there's really no comparison, right? I want you to focus instead on unit sales. And the question being is, how many unit sales do you need to make in order to hit your goal?
Comparable movies' performances aren't always the best indicator of your sales prospects. The closest movie I can think of to counterintelligence is Burn After Reading. It was a huge inspiration, but Burn After Reading stars Frances McDormand, George Clooney, Brad Pitt, John Malkovich, and Tilda Swinton, and it's the Coen brothers' follow-up to their Oscar sensation No Country for Old Men. Had it not possessed these strong attributes, would it have made a financial splash? It's hard to say, and it's very difficult to find other films in our budget range dealing with similar themes the way that we have. Other small films may have a few similar facets, but they are their own visions. So outside of looking at comps, it can be helpful to reframe and think of how much you actually need to make back in order to break even, and how many individual units you'll need to sell in order to see that return. Here's an iTunes example.
Sell your film for $10, you get to keep 7. So that means that if you made your film for $100,000, and that was your goal, you need to make $100,000 no matter what, then that means that you need to sell 14,286 units.
As you know, we made Counterintelligence for $12,000, which means if we sold the film for $10, making $7 per unit after iTunes cut, we'd need to sell about 1,715 units to break even. And when it's framed that way, it gets a little less abstract and a little more conceivable.
It's not how much money your film's going to make, it's how many units you're going to sell. More importantly, how are you going to sell that amount of units?
Getting in front of an audience is a complicated thing. That's really all marketing is. It can be done on foot, guerrilla style, through paid ads, or even recommendations. How does Jason suggest getting your film in front of an audience?
For years and years and years back in the day, I used to say that you had to build an audience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As I've grown, as I've learned more, I can tell you that that's hogwash. You do not need to build your own audience, but you do need to identify the type of person who is going to enjoy your film. And then you're going to need to figure out how to get in front of those people.
As we all know, the internet is made up of blogs and mini platforms, locations people follow for information and recommendations on the best of this, that, and the other. These platforms are brands in and of themselves. Showhawk, Mike's and my website that powers this very podcast, is one of them. The reach of Showhawk far exceeds my own reach, but it's geared toward other filmmakers. So any of you listeners who came here for information on filmmaking or got here through Showhawk by those same interests, well, you're not necessarily who Counterintelligence is for. I mean, I hope you like it, and some of you may take an interest in seeing it, but that's no strategy. I learned that hard lesson on my documentary Light. Filmmakers have subjective tastes, like any other person, and unless they're interested in a film by its own merits, or unless that film is about filmmaking, they can't be depended on as a market any more than plumbers as a whole are a solid market for books about copper pipes. What filmmakers need to look for when thinking of promotion are niche groups relating to the themes and topics in their film.
Now you start looking at different blogs, websites, different influencers in terms of your casting if you haven't yet made the film, or in terms of finding influencers that would help you cross-promote through their channels.
Many of these platforms collect email subscribers, those in their niche who follow them for further information and updates.
One of the things that you're looking for as well are email lists. Email lists of large publications that are already catering to the people that you're trying to reach.
These email lists range from followers of blogs to supporters of a nonprofit or social cause. Any site or influencer with an email list has a direct line to their subscribers' inboxes. And if they make a recommendation, there's a good chance at least some of their list will take it seriously, because that's why they subscribe. If that influencer deems your film worth recommending and relevant to that audience, you've got a good fast track to a lot of eyeballs. It's not in any influencer's best interest to recommend anything their audience doesn't like, so your film has to be a good fit. But if it is, that's massive, because email lists can hold a few hundred subscribers, a few 100,000, or in some cases, a few million.
Once you know your number, once you know how many units you need to sell, then you start working backwards, right? And you come up with this plan of 10, 15, 30, 50, 100, 200 different blogs, publications, websites, etc., with a plan for each one of those. And not just a plan, but by now, the person that runs the blog or the website or the publication, they know how many readers they have. They know how many subscribers they have. So if you know that, you can infer how many people you're potentially going to get in front of, and you can make conservative estimates in terms of how many units you're going to sell through each one of those channels.
In my experience, a conservative estimate for actual purchases, or a conversion rate, is 2%. 2% of any site's followers or subscribers could actually buy your film or product. If you get a strong recommendation to an email list of 100,000 people, you may be able to sell around 2,000 units. If you promote on a relevant podcast with 100 listeners, odds are you may get 2 sales. You'll want to believe you can do better, but it doesn't have much to do with you or your movie. Consider how many ads you see and hear on a weekly basis and how little you respond to them. I listen to a lot of podcasts where authors are interviewed. I'd imagine I buy 1 out of every 20 or more books I hear promoted, even if most of them sound really interesting. And I rarely cash in on ads without a promo code being offered on something extremely relevant to me. This 2% formula can be applied to social media influencers who help you in posts on blogs. Of course, there are exceptions, but typically 2% of any following stands a chance to buy. So if you can do your research within your niche and cultivate a long enough list of different platforms to reach out to, present your film to them as relevant to their audience, expecting to only hear back from a few, you could have strong results. Again, we know how many units we need to sell to break even, 1,715. This means Counterintelligence will need to reach roughly 85,750 people to hit break-even, assuming 2% of them will purchase the film for $10 on iTunes or Amazon. When reaching out to these influencers with lists and followings, it's also important to remember that many of them will say no thanks. So you're better off making a really long list of blogs, sites, podcasts, and social media influencers to play it safe. And in our case, a grand total of 50,000 followers across all these channels probably won't be enough, especially to profit. I've been doing this research throughout the entire process of making the film, looking at Amazon buying trends for similar films, noting blogs and podcasts relevant to counterintelligence, and tracking influencers in a bunch of online niche spaces relating to the film. This way, when the day comes to release digitally, I have a few plans of attack to try out. But I really have to stress this. The priority from the start has to be not to spam people. I want Counterintelligence to reach an audience that will actually appreciate it. Therefore, those influencers must themselves appreciate it. And that's what our plan centers around. You must respect the people you're reaching out to. If you're doing it right, you're giving them the content to help feed their audience. If they reject your content, they know their audience better than you do. Trust that. Thank them and move on. They don't owe you a damn thing, so be gracious and grateful. Funny thing about it is, Jason says once this legwork has been done, distributors can sometimes come knocking.
They're going to start coming out and they're going to want to work with you. And the reason they're going to want to work with you is the hard part's over. You've already figured out how you're going to move all these units, and now the distributor sees an opportunity to work with somebody that's going to help them make money.
Because that's what it's about for distributors. They're businesses, and businesses ask, can we profit from this investment? If they invest anything in your film, they'll want to see a return. And whether they use trick accounting to screw you out of your part, or they're truly honest brokers, their eye is on the margins. Hard to blame the good ones. If you've done the work to find the audience that will bring in the money, you've saved them some steps, and they may even be able to help out further from there. In the middle of post on Counterintelligence, I had the privilege of taking an online phone consultation with John Reese, the author of Think Outside the Box Office. He runs a consulting service for independent films to help them find the most efficient distribution option for their projects. We talked about Counterintelligence and agreed his services may have been a little outside our budget, but he did kindly suggest that direct distribution might be the most sensible path, given the budget and having seen the topical teaser. I also talked briefly with another consultant who said the same, so that's been the plan, and I'm glad I've invested the time in collecting this market research. I'm still open to a distributor if they're a good fit, but only if they can really offer something special that will relieve a lot of work from my plate and that guarantees a higher quality effort. Direct distribution is going to require testing a lot of things. It'll be a slow-going process. One other thing I learned while releasing Light was the audience you think is right might not be the one who actually wants the film. This time, I'm prepared for that. Big films make big splashes, often banking on making their budget back in the first weekend, but little films, like ours, they get to take their time, like a slow-scaling tech launch. We have as much time as we have patience. That South by Southwest rejection email went on to say, quote, "There are all sorts of reasons why films are not selected. There's no absolute determination of quality or success. We are paying attention to the entire program we're presenting and how it works in terms of overall tone, different filmmaking styles, subjects, budgets, and audiences, etc." End quote. Beyond the volume problem, festivals are structuring programs. Each year at each fest tells a story unto itself, and it's a story you can't curate. Either yours fits with it, or it doesn't. It did hurt to get that reply, but mostly because I've been busting my ass in the edit to get that rough cut out to South by the final late deadline. Here's me rehashing that with Dre.
Just looking at it now, finished, the thought of having sent it to any festivals in the condition that it was is pretty shitty.
I think you were just excited.
Well, it was just like I thought that if they, on the outside chance that they did accept it in rough cut form, or I would keep updating it.
Well, that's the thing. They say that you can do rough cut, and then they don't choose anyone with rough cut.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Most festivals say they accept rough cuts, but what they don't remind you is that you're competing against films with multi-million-dollar budgets and a spectrum of known faces and names. Not that it's their job to tell you, we should all know that by now. I thought maybe our rinky-dink rough with temp footage, no color grade or sound mix, and a little message in the beginning could fight its way through the noise, but it turned out we were like everybody else who didn't get in. The email ended with, quote, "We're sorry for this disappointing news and so appreciate your desire to have screened at the South by Southwest Film Festival," end quote. I mean, rejection sucks. A few years ago, Mike and I submitted a pitch to a Project Greenlight digital series competition, and we made it all the way to the top 10. Then we lost. And afterward, I wrote a blog post for Showhawk called "I'm a Failure, an honest look at rejection for filmmakers." And to this day, that post is one of our most trafficked and commented on posts in the history of our site. And that fact was cathartic to me in addressing the entire experience. And you know why? Because I didn't feel alone. And if you've been rejected by a contest or festival or both, neither are you. The rejection isn't a measure of your career. What you do next is how you learn from it going forward. Before submitting to South by, I had already had a direct distribution plan. That plan got clearer while I waited to hear back, and when that email came in, I was bummed out for a second, but could rest easy knowing the film still had a future. We'll still submit it to some festivals, but on our own terms, and not for anything they can offer except more eyes on our film. There's a difference between need-to-haves and nice-to-haves. The only regret I was left with in the moments after processing the rejection, I'd expended so much energy and needless stress in that mad dash to deliver the rough cut. I should have been smarter. I should have been clearer-eyed and played the odds a little more carefully. I should have skewed more in the direction of good is better than done. I should have put that $100 submission fee into making the film better, or at least saved it for a later submission. And I should have listened to Dre long before we did this interview in our living room.
I know that you have really strong goals, and I know that this is something that will be a part of you for the rest of your life, of being a director and making movies and making documentaries and all those things, all those great things. You just still have to have, a life as well, and not be so hard on yourself, I think.
Thanks. Good looking out.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the finale of Season 1 of Make This Movie. If you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen. While you're there, you could totally leave us a rating or a comment or both if you so choose. Those are easy ways to help spread the word to other listeners who like the same stuff as you. Music for the show comes from our film, Counterintelligence, and was composed by the great Noah Simons, who you can find on SoundCloud or Bandcamp as Larians, Larians, and his band, Male Blonding, on Bandcamp, iTunes, and Spotify. They're super good. Make This Movie is brought to you by Showhawk Media. If you're a filmmaker who wants even more useful info and tools, visit showhawk.com/makethismovie and sign up to access our free micro-budget producer starter kit, including template spreadsheets, documents, and other great stuff we cover throughout this series, ready for you to fill in the blanks. That's showhawk.com/makethismovie. Visit counterflick.com for more information on Counterintelligence, the movie, including fun stuff like our satirical fake news page. Also on Facebook is Counterintelligence, Twitter and Instagram @Counterflick. I'm Chris Socker. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.